lasse es einfach erstmal.
Walking down here, it gets narrower and narrower. It gets more and more stifling. It's like, although there is an exit, okay, but not back then. I'm just going to let it all sink in on an emotional level, because it's as if all sound is receding. It feels quite tranquil to me. I find it rather arbitrary. There's a sense of no escape. From the outside, it appears so useless and not really attractive. From the outside, you can't see the whole impact the interior has. Yeah, it's at the lowest point that the effect becomes noticeable. Well, when you start here in this flat part and then move down to the lower area, well, then you're right inside immediately, and you get these associations. It gets narrower and narrower, almost like a tomb. I sort of wish there was a definite statement on what it's really supposed to be, or whether they sort of avoided doing so, like, if you don't realize what it is, then you're simply too stupid, or something like that. Well, I did see them as stone slabs, as gravestones. Menacing. Also the fact that they're tilted and sometimes so cramped. But I know I can get out of here. But they didn't get out. Conventional memorials like the Victory Column or the Soviet War Memorial are just around the corner from here. But Eisenman deliberately said the only way to approach the Holocaust, this crime and also this incalculable loss of human life, is through an abstract work of art. For this, there is no definite message, only a field of stele, where you can walk around as you like. And by walking through it, people should remember, should have associations. We don't tell them what to think or how they should respond. Everyone finds their own interpretation. There's no getting around that, pure and simple. You cannot sidestep that fact, and that's the whole idea. Where else do you think it could be, if not right in the middle of the city? I feel it's critical that it's here right in the center of things. It's like for anyone living in or anyone coming to Berlin, they have to go here. Well, I feel that the land itself is so valuable, I wonder whether it's really worth it. Putting it somewhere out in the suburbs is not an option. Then you might as well park it somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. The most important thing for us was that we were raising the Jews above Adolf Hitler. We were placing this memorial right where he killed himself, where his bones lie. That's what we wanted, and that's what we got. The information center informs people what this memorial stands for. And after visiting the information center, they have a completely different view of the field of stele. When visitors enter the information center from the field of stele, the first thing they see are the 6 portraits behind me. Those exhibited on the front wall of the entrance foyer are in such a prominent place because it was particularly important to us to demonstrate one of the principles of our exposition, a principle that applies just as much to the 4 subsequent rooms. It is referred to as the principle of personification. This involves our showing the history of the Holocaust from the viewpoint of the many individuals who were persecuted and murdered, and then grouping the general information around it. This timeline should give visitors an opportunity to gather fundamental information on the chronology of events of the Holocaust. Before visitors enter the actual exhibit, which focuses on the personal fates of the victims, they have the opportunity, via texts and images, to follow each of the separate stages of persecution, how that persecution escalated. And one of these pictures where this personification principle becomes especially clear is this one here. It's a picture of Arnold Blitz, one of the survivors of the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, taken in May 1945 in Berlin on the Kurfürstendamm Boulevard. And he's evidently switched clothes with another fellow prisoner who survived. He wears the prisoner's pants, the other fellow the prisoner's top. They're clearly recognizable as concentration camp prisoners. It was Mr. Blitz who obtained a camera to have themselves photographed, very demonstratively making a visual statement. We're still here. We survived. There were one or two texts that were especially difficult to write. These were the texts on 1941, on the fall of 1941. Because Fall 41 was the critical phase where a plan, no matter how it had been put together beforehand, was then actually put into action. And this plan was implemented in occupied Poland in the summer of 1941, where the situations in the ghettos was already dire. This misery was created by the Germans themselves. The Jewish ghetto inhabitants were not allowed to work, were not allowed to earn any money. They were provided for, but badly. Many were sick, many were starving, and as this misery was immense, and the German authorities had already announced that additional groups of Jews were to be transported to the ghettos from Germany, the local National Socialist authorities began to implement a plan that did not ease the situation for the ghetto inhabitants, did not give them more freedom and finally release them, but rather implemented a plan consisting of murdering these people.
Diese Planungen sahen vor, diese Menschen zu ermorden.
And to display this, so to speak, from the viewpoint of a forced act, the perpetrators claimed it as such and felt it, but which naturally was nothing of the sort. That was very difficult, because our task was to make it understandable for visitors that there was no such necessity. This was all planned, and these plans were simply and consciously stepped up further and further.
Dass das alles Planungen waren, die einfach immer weiter bewusst eskaliert wurden.
Each of the 4 rooms has a different thematic focus, and this is reflected in the varying designs, corresponding to the respective focus. And here in this room, which is all about the dimensions involved, the sheer number, the 6 million people who were obliterated, what better way to express that than through empty space? The room is void, almost completely empty of 3-dimensional objects. And the loss and the absence of these people can only be expressed through this emptiness.
Die Idee, diese ganz persönlichen und
The
privaten
idea to present these very personal and private quotations on the ground formed as I was imagining, what's it like when someone reads a source of this nature?
eine solche Quelle liest.
It affects you so strongly that you look down, you lower your eyes, which helps you to look within yourself, helping you to contemplate it all the more clearly. And I simply feel it's easier to confront this on an emotional level with your head bowed than if your head is upright. The quotation that moves me again and again the most is the farewell letter here of the 12-year-old that knows she is going to her death and is bidding her father farewell because she knows that she will never see him again. In this room I've taken up the formal aspect of the field of stele practically one-to-one and continued it so that here it looks as if the stele of the memorial are growing through the ceiling, opening up here and allowing the victims to speak. At the same time, they also represent the fates of families, and usually families are the root or foundation of any society. These families here had their contact to the earth torn from them, meaning they remain suspended, separated from the earth, divorced from their roots. And the design expresses this as well, the uprooting of the families who were then destroyed and scattered in all directions. Right here, for example, we're standing in front of the story of the Habermann family from eastern Poland, a Polish-speaking Jewish bourgeois family that after 1941 got caught in the terrible persecution by the German occupiers and the German SS. The mother was deported to an extermination camp, the father forced to work as a slave laborer in the oil industry. The family managed to save themselves again and again from the continuous shootings by going into hiding, always alternating between being in hiding and working as slave laborers. And at one time the daughter, Sabina, was discovered and photographed when she was found in one of these hiding places. This photo still exists because a local Polish photographer had kept it in his archives and gave it to her after the war. And that is actually the exception, as generally most of these family histories here, with all these photos, are exceptions. Most families vanished without a trace. They were murdered without leaving any traces of their existence.
Sie sind ermordet worden, ohne Spuren zu hinterlassen.
Elinor Oettinger was born on the 8th of September 1929 in Hamburg. She was the daughter of the tobacco dealer Herbert Noah Oettinger and his wife Betty. Elinor was still a little girl when her family moved to Amsterdam. In May 1940, the German army occupied the country. After a police raid in 1942, Elinor was deported with her family to the Dutch transit camp Westerbork, from there to Theresienstadt near Prague, and 2 years later to Auschwitz. There, Elinor Oettinger was murdered, probably in October 1944 in a gas chamber. She was 15 years old.
When you leave the room of family fates and go into the room of names, you first encounter darkness, and all you see is one name being projected. You begin to hear a story, just sound coming from speakers. The story is told, and the images have to be formed in your head. The visitor has to sit down and listen to the story being told, and the images of the various lives must be created by him or herself.
In August 1942, SS units liquidated the ghetto, deporting 21,000 Jews to Treblinka, where they were murdered in the gas chamber. Among them was Zala Luzia Zolovic. She was 27 years old.
6 million
murdered Jews is a figure that is wholly incomprehensible. We selected 600 stories from this enormous amount, and when a visitor enters this room, he or she hears a story, and in that instant, this one person is seized from anonymity.
The policeman ordered me to undress and shoved me towards the group of Jews standing at the pit awaiting their death. Just before they started shooting at us, I jumped down into the pit. I fell onto the dead people. Then the bodies of those who had been shot fell on top of me. I noticed that I hadn't been hit. The shooting continued. I pushed the corpses away from me, afraid I'd be buried alive. I did this very cautiously, so as not to be detected by the police. Suddenly, it all stopped. It became quiet.
Here in the Room of Places, 220 places all over Europe are shown, representative for all the sites of persecution and annihilation. It was important to us to present the Jewish setting, in this case via these individual sites. Similar to the Room of Families, the idea was to show that this crime did not simply come from nowhere. Rather, we wanted to demonstrate these were wholly intact social environments. And it was then, at these sites, that this and this transpired. In addition, we wanted to use this room to show how many sites there are in Europe that are unknown. Not necessarily sites that have been forgotten, but places most people know nothing about. And it was these sites that we wanted to make people aware of. Consider this. Some deportations from Polish ghettos sent more people to their deaths on a single day than were killed brutally in some concentration camps during the entire existence of that camp. That's really what we wanted to communicate. There's a letter about a mass shooting in Marilov, Belarus in the fall of 1941, and I seem to recall that it was a man who was the father of a family writing, I believe a state official, postal agent in Vienna or something like that. And he had his own family. And so he's writing to his wife, who is sitting at home in Vienna with, I think, 2 children, how amazing it is to see the Jewish babies flying through the air, and how great it is to shoot them down. And this is a document that always leaves me shaking my head in astonishment, because when you have your own family, you have 2 children of your own, to be part of something like this, and then to even describe it the way he does, just shows how profound the seed or the roots of this anti-Semitism were. Just this feeling or this insane ideology, Jews must be annihilated, and that applies to babies just as much as it does to the aged. That was really one of those documents where I just sat there and decided that's enough for today. Coming out of the exhibit, where the development of the Holocaust is presented historically, that is, what was going on between 1933 and 1945, we then enter Foyer 4 and are in the present, and are not showing the events themselves, but rather the memory of them, the commemoration of it all, the commemorative culture with regard to the Nazi persecution throughout all of Europe. In this information center, the database of names of the Jerusalem Holocaust Memorial Yad Vashem is available. Visitors can go to the terminals and search for individuals, for people, for names, for places. If I want to know who was murdered in the Holocaust from my place of birth, I can enter the name of the place and will, usually, find a certain number of people who were murdered in the Holocaust. I was imagining that when you walk through the field of Stele as a visitor, and you see these blocks of concrete that are initially totally detached from any kind of content, but that when I take up this formal aspect here in the information center and then convert this form into a medium of information and reinterpret them, so that subsequently the visitors of the exhibit see the field of Stele with different eyes and associate this content with these shapes that they first saw here.
Und diese Inhalte damit assoziieren, die sie hier gesehen haben.
I'm going to bear a tremendous sense of impression with me. The exhibit impressed me very much. There's so much that stays with you. Indeed, I'm totally speechless. I can't comprehend it. It affected me deeply. I feel like when you leave this place, you become quiet and thoughtful, again and again. In the entry area, the photos of 5 or 6 people, large-sized portraits. These are personal stories to be discovered behind the images. When I heard that a huge field of standing stones was going to be built here, I thought, well, okay, what's that going to turn out to be? But now that you've gone down here and seen it, then you understand it all right.
The
time I felt most strongly affected here at this memorial was during the conversation with the Auschwitz survivor, as he, in his sonorous voice, reported for over 2 hours on the most horrifying barbarities that he had witnessed at Auschwitz and experienced himself, and then suddenly burst into tears as he was telling how he was reunited with his mother here in Berlin, his mother who had long given up the hope that she would ever see him again, given up hope that that he would ever return. That was a very moving moment. Or when you have a visitor saying, I lost my grandmother in Auschwitz and she was murdered there. She was cremated and I don't know where her ashes are. And this visitor takes a stone and places it on one of the stelae that is not dedicated, not individually inscripted, and says, this stele now belongs to my grandmother. And you have to agree, this man is right.
Man kann sagen, dieser Mann hat recht.
We must be aware of what happened to the Jews. We must be aware of the things dictators are capable of concocting. And we must learn, never again, and put up resistance, but early enough and right from the start. When something like this begins to develop, you must be careful offering resistance and saying, no, we refuse to accept this. When the young generation learns this, the older generation as well, but especially the young people, that is something that we wanted to accomplish with this memorial, and perhaps were able to accomplish.